plot twists, great finishes, and exciting plays. We all wrap it up in one big bundle. I'll break it down with you next. So another week in the NFL, week 5 in the NFL season is here. We're going to go through 3 games as we always do to kind of put a focus and a focal point on it. I must admit, there's it was some strange matchups, but they ended up being some really intriguing matches in some cases. So we're gonna go through 3 of them, 3 matchups today. I'm gonna start with Chargers Commanders. In LA. This was one of these games where it's about kind of the new brigade, new era of new quarterbacks. They're going to be part of the league for the next maybe decade or so. And Jayden Daniels, Justin Herbert. The Chargers, after I gave them a little bit of praise, I must have given them too much praise. They've kind of stumbled a little bit in the last few weeks. So they lose 27-10. This game was a really strange game because really, once again, it turned pretty much within 35 seconds or 34 seconds. And, the Chargers are one of these teams that have a way of, they don't like good fortune. So they get up on the early lead. They're up 10-0. They're kind of looking to run away with it. Then a turnover happens. It gets Washington back in the game, and Jayden Daniels, who is very effective of taking advantage of turnovers and taking advantage of your mistakes, even if they're not actually official turnovers. They get in the end zone. Daniels himself, just to look at the numbers here, he had a touchdown. Completion percentage was a great 57.7%, and he threw for 231 yards. So on paper, he doesn't look great, but when you watch the game, the command he has, already at such a young age, being in the second year, it's really something to behold, to see the poise, and it's really actually a stark reflection versus his counterpart on that he's playing against today. But I'll say this, Washington is a team you gotta watch for. They've been very, they're very well run, well coached. I think they're very, Cliff Kingsbury may not be a great coach, but I think as an offensive coordinator, he has a very creative way of designing plays, and he keeps it keeps your defenses on the back foot a lot of times, and they're aggressive. Man, are they aggressive! And we'll get a little bit more about that later on when we break down this game. But Washington had, they were hanging on a bit on the road. The Chargers couldn't put them away. That just seems to be a Chargers mantra for almost their entire existence, be it it's San Diego or Los Angeles. Let me just get to them on the other side of the ball. They had 2 major turnovers in the game. The first one, as I said before, was the fumble. It's like they're driving down there. They're about to put the stake in the heart of Washington. At that point they're up 10-0, I believe, and then it's like boom, they hit the fumble, and literally that is where things slowly started to shift. As I said before, it got Washington back in the game at that point. When Crochet Merritt in this case fumbles. He had a pretty good game actually, though. He had 2 touchdowns. He ran for 111. And that's only on 14 attempts, but that was a costly mistake there. And then afterwards, the moment where things changed was with 34 seconds left. Washington's pinned. They can't get out of their end zone. They have to punt it out of their end zone. Now, this is what I don't get. In this case here, that the only way you could bail Washington out at that point is if you get a penalty, a roughing the kicker, roughing the punter, penalty. So what do the Chargers do? And this is the part that you're going to put salt in the wounds. McConkey gets the ball pretty much from midfield. It has an amazing run back on the right sideline, and then it literally hurdles the punter at the end for the touchdown. I tell you, if it counted, it would be like maybe on the tops of the plays of the year when it said it done. Fantastic punt return, but it was all for naught. Why? Because in this case here, the special teams and the Chargers ran into the punter in the end zone. So not only you take away the 7 points that were there, that would put you up at that point, I believe 17-7, going into halftime. No, you now in this case here, you get the penalty, and it's Washington's ball. And what Washington ended up doing, putting points on the board when it was all said and done. It's like you sit here, you sit here and shake your head. It's like, this can't be for real. You can't be serious, right? And you're sitting there going like, these Chargers never learn. They never learn. As far as the protection goes, Washington was like their defense was flying. They ended up with 5 sacks on Herbert. This is the second week, I believe, in a row where the offensive line of the Chargers has been looking like anyone can walk through it when they want to. That is a concerning problem for Harbaugh. They need to sort that out real quick before they start playing some more of their division rivals, where they have guys like Max Crosby and Jones in this case, which they faced already, but it's going to be a little different the next time around. So they better be on it. And that Denver defense, so they got to sort that out in a hurry. Herbert himself, just since I mentioned him, he had 1 touchdown, 1 pick, which I'll get to in a second. He had a completion rate of 75.9%, 166 yards for him. I put him in some ways, he's getting treated a little bit like how Jacksonville's kind of doing with Lawrence, where, it's a lot of safe stuff they're giving with him. Not as aggressive as, in previous years with Herbert. He's not getting those big numbers like before. Is definitely trying to minimize mistakes across the board. It didn't help in this case here because late in the game, where they had an opportunity to put, get some, get back in the game, what ended up happening, they ended up throwing a pick pretty much on the goal line. And you know what? This leads to something just on a side. What's up with the goal line offense this year, man? I don't know how many times I've seen folks at the 2 or the 1 yard line, and someone fumbles, someone, somehow someone messes up on the penalty and just botches the play. In this case, it was a tip ball, not really, it was a bad luck on Herbert's part, but it was a pick. And you're sitting there going like, how is it so hard to get 2 yards in this case in the end zone? I thought we had all these fancy guys in this case to do what they're doing on offense, and yet it seems like we're having folks imploding at the goal line. Anyhow, that pretty much iced the game for them at that point. And when you looked at from I almost said San Diego. Yep, that's put a cord in the jar, as they say. The Chargers, when you look at it from their perspective, the sloppiness that has always been a bit of their concern, it reared its ugly head again. Washington went down and drove, I think on 4th and 7 it was. I mean, you talk about gutsy call, man. There ain't no field goal happening here, man. Man, they went for it. And, man, the pass that Daniels put up there for Debo was a thing of beauty, man. Like, the dude is cold as ice. But it's funny because he's the guy in this case. He's kind of the guy that we thought that Herbert would be coming in the league, where folks were already giving him top 5 status and stuff like that. And Daniels, I'm not saying he's top 5 quarterback yet, but he's knocking on the doorstep if he keeps playing like this. Yeah, so fun game there. Lots of stuff going on. Lots of concerns in this case on both sides of the ball for the Chargers, and they're in a pretty tough division already, so that could get really interesting really quickly for Harbaugh and that bunch. For Washington, they are a team on the rise. Beware, beware, beware. Game number 2, heading down the 401, the QEW, man. We're going down to Orchard Park, man. Woo. Below Buffalo, Pats Buffalo, night game Sunday night. Buffalo night game, strange things seem to happen, it feels like. I don't know what it is about it, but this game wasn't as strange as others, but it was still intriguing to see Buffalo kind of, turn back into a pumpkin a little bit. This felt a little bit like previous Buffalo years where they're kind of kicking around the ball. Allen had 2 touchdowns, but he also had the 1 pick. He had a 71% completion percentage and then 253 yards. One thing is interesting though. Kincaid ended up with a buck 8 on 6 catches, and that to me that tells me if you're getting so much in this case that your tight end tells me that you're not getting the ball deep to your receivers. That's something to watch for the rest of the season. I know Coleman seems like he's becoming maybe the player they thought he would be, but that is something to be very wary of as the year goes on with Buffalo. New England side of it, though, as I said before, that's why I call this the young guns, man, because Maye looked great, man. Drake Maye looked great. He didn't do anything to kind of put his team out of position to lose the game, but he made the really big play at the end of the game. I mean, Buffalo, he had Bills hanging off of him, tosses a pass to Stephon Diggs, who, believe me, boy, you talk about, for all you old James Brown fans, boy, this was the big payback, boy. Let me tell you. he put it on them, boy. Oh my gosh, it was ridiculous. A buck 46 on 10 catches, and that catch I was mentioning was the one that sealed it for them to get the drive to get into the field goal range for the winning field goal. So amazing game by Diggs. Overall, just a complete game for New England. They might be for real. They get over 500. Obviously, obviously Vrabel can coach. So this, they could be making a noise. And with Miami faltering and the Jets being the Jets, who we'll get to in a second. Last week I was kind of picky on the NFC. This week I'm kind of perusing the AFC, and we'll get to them in a second in the third game. But New England right now, all of a sudden, if you're a Pats fan, you're like, hey, why not us? With Baltimore right now struggling at the moment. You got the Chiefs kind of like still, even though they riled off some wins. I'm not sure if it's they're a given just yet with their situation. You throw in Cincinnati situation with Burrow gone, and all of a sudden now you're the Pats and you're sitting there going like, why not us? I think Denver, I think is another team in that mix. I think the Chargers still will have to be another team considered in that. And my black and gold, I think, will definitely have to be in that mix. The Steelers of teams who are maybe they're thinking like, okay, we might get a chance to be a fringe playoff team, and now you can start thinking getting a little greedier now with potential seeding based on some of the teams that were expected to be there at the beginning of the season that are at least the moment faltering a little bit. So let's get into game number 3. Big D, how about them Cowboys? I had you for dead a few weeks ago. Did a pod on it. I still ain't sold, folks. I still ain't sold. But I gotta give credit where credit is due, man. Gives Jack his jacket, as my dad would say, man. And Dak, in this case here, with not much to work with, he spread it around nicely. Fournette had 114 on 6 catches. Dak himself 4 touchdowns. 62% completion percentage and 237 yards. So he was solid. But you gotta give him credit. The defense is still not great, but because Fields had 2 touchdowns of his own. He had almost a 70% completion percentage and 283 yards himself. I think Fields hasn't been bad in this case here. I think Jets fans might be a little tougher on him, but that defense, my gosh, that defense, dude. Aaron Glenn, you're one of the best defensive players the Jets had in recent history. What the heck's going on with that defense? And it's interesting to think about because when they drafted Zach Wilson in 2021, the issue was at the time when they had, they were half decent that year. I think they were at 500 or so, and they were in and out of the line with Zach Wilson. I can't remember who the was that Flacco? I think it was Flacco. Was their vet at the time, and the defense was who was carrying them in those games. I mean, they barely could score 2 touchdowns in those games half the time, but the defense in those early years with Zach Wilson was the star. And now here we are now in 2025 now. The offense is, at times competent enough, I'll put it that way. But the defense has been atrocious. I mean, if you go and watch the highlights, go watch the highlights if you not watch that game, folks. I was watching some of that game, and literally you can see there's not a player in sight in green anywhere near some of these Cowboy receivers. They're throwing screens out there, and guys ain't getting touched walking into the end zone. It was unreal. So Aaron Glenn, I don't know, man. Some heads may have to roll when it comes on the defensive side because you can't have that, man. You just can't. You just can't. And I am curious to see what happens in Gotham the next few weeks with the Jets because they're 0-5. That it could, it's already ugly. It can get a lot worse fast considering that they're gonna have the Bills and other teams coming up next, man. Like, you can see 0-10 real quick. In Gotham. And Glenn's going to have to figure out real quick if he wants to save his job, he got to start firing some folks on that defensive side, man. I understand you want to be loyal to folks you brought in, but, they ain't getting it done, man. They ain't getting it done. On the Dallas side, 2-1. I wouldn't put out the ticker tape parade yet. They're in a tough division already. They have a tough schedule for the most part. Dallas tends to have one because they're usually a pretty good team. I'm still very concerned about the defense on their side as well too. Now true, the Jets put up 22 points. But Fields in this case, I gave the numbers for Fields. I mean, and that's Fields. I'm just saying that's Fields. That ain't Jayden Daniels. That ain't Jalen Hurts. You keep moving down the scoreboard in this case when they play San Francisco or anybody like that. That's not the Detroit Lions, for example. Like, you're gonna have to deal with some teams coming up in your own conference as well as in the AFC side, where you're gonna be sitting there going like, "Oh, yeah, this might not have been what we thought it was when we were here in Week 5." So Dallas fans, just slow it down a little bit. I ain't trusting what I'm seeing yet with them, but props to Dak. In true Dallas fashion, all it takes a couple good weeks. All of a sudden, now we're talking about Dak Prescott in MVP talk. It's like, you gotta love Dallas, man. Oh man, the media will always do their bidding, man. 2 good weeks, MVP talk. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if Dak played in this case for Carolina? I doubt that in this case that would ever happen where MVP talk would happen. Can you imagine if Bryce Young had those 2 weeks? I don't think Bryce Young's getting any MVP talk. Let me put it that way. Well, anyways, I'm gonna give a few final thoughts, and coming out from this week, I think right now there's some teams right now. We mentioned the Jets, the Raiders are in some trouble, man. It's getting ugly out there in Vegas. Pete Carroll might not be long for this. Not that I think in this case here Davis is gonna fire him or anything like that, or the upper management's gonna fire Pete Carroll. I think Pete Carroll might fire Pete Carroll before it's done. He might be like, I didn't sign up for this. True, I guess it's cool living in Vegas, but he probably didn't sign up for some of this. That's getting to be a messy situation over there. I think the Baltimore situation right now is at red alert time over there as well too. I think Cincinnati's in some trouble. There's some teams right now that probably had some different plans and they are in some serious trouble. And they're going to have to figure out a way to scratch out some wins to get over the hump, to hope to get certain players back in some cases. The Raiders is just more of an issue of like, yo, man, either the coaching ain't right or the talent ain't right. So something's got to give over there at some point. But those are my thoughts for this week in the NFL, Week 5. It's always crazy in the NFL. Once again, you can always catch me, obviously, here at Beyond the Locker Room, but also at Basketball Rewind. We had a great episode came out talking about this latest scrimmage here, in Calgary for the Raps. Season's coming along. Preseason has now started. By the time this comes out, the first preseason game would be done. Also, too, check me out, as always, on my social media platforms. You can find me on that thing called X, Blue Sky, of course, Facebook, and right here on YouTube, where you can like, subscribe, and comment, guys. So once again, I'll check you all next week. And I'll see you later. And keep on enjoying the games, man. Peace.